Public dialogue and civic engagement are important. They play a role in improving the health and well-being of Texans across our great state. That's why Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Texas is proud to support Texas Tribune events like the conversation you're about to see.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Terri Langford with Texas Tribune. For the past 6 months, the unraveling of a $20 million no-bid contract for fraud tracking software between Texas Health and Human Services Commission and a little-known Austin firm named 21C has taken the center's news stage here in Austin. Last December, state officials canceled a $90 million extension with 21CT after it was revealed HHSC's top lawyer was once a business partner of 21CT's lobbyists. How the deal came together has preoccupied 4 investigations right now. 2 of those with the Travis County District Attorney's Office and the PIU and the FBI are still ongoing. And as a result, lawmakers can't stop talking about contract reform this session. This afternoon, I'm going to talk to a man at the center of all of these investigations, but one he conducted himself, Billy Hamilton. So, hold on. Sorry, we got to edit as we go because we had so many other introductions to go. Billy Hamilton is the Executive Chancellor and CFO for the Texas A&M University system, and he was tapped by Governor Greg Abbott a few months ago to lead a strike force team to examine the decisions and processes that led to the 21CT contract. He's a veteran government manager, having served 16 years as Deputy Texas Comptroller. He's worked on everything from CPRIT to Cap Metro, and his team's recent report speaks of an agency in quiet turmoil. So, Billy, let me talk to you first about what surprised you the most after you and your team got to HHSC.
Well,
you got it?
yeah, I want to make sure it's working. Can you hear that? Okay, good.
Little up closer to your mouth.
A little closer to my mouth. I always have an inclination to start singing feelings when I don't think anything was a dramatic surprise. I think Commissioner Janik, the governor gave us authority to look at whatever we wanted, and Commissioner Janik gave us access to really all of his staff, and they were very cooperative. I think they were ready to talk about the situation because they were frustrated and they felt like they were being tainted by this single contract. And but it became pretty clear to my colleague Heather Griffith Peterson and I, and that is your strike force, 2 people, that there were some broader issues, and I felt like there were a couple of things that needed to be avoided in the work to deal with this situation. Is one, we didn't want to see contract management for the entire state damaged by what was really the actions of a few people on one contract. And second, we felt there were other issues that had particularly come out of the Sunset Report, notably consolidation of the Health and Human Service agencies, that in light of this problem needed more discussion. And so, our report tried to take the situation and put it in some degree of context, both going back to the 2003 consolidation and then forward to the potential consolidation of the 5 agencies in the Health and Human Service Commission.
Okay. Is this just a matter of a large agency which doesn't think anyone's looking, or a large agency no one's asking questions about? And what can you talk about some specifics that were to HHSC that you don't see with other agencies?
Well, yeah, there's 2, and I think people that have been around Health and Human Services for a while know what one of them is, which is the independence of the Office of Inspector General. Now, I happen to think that level of independence is a useful feature of the Inspector General's mission and original intent. And if you read the report, after a lot of caffeine, I hope, but if you read the report, we actually sort of go into the history of how these came about. But it is an independent entity that is also within Health and Human Services, and they had perhaps more latitude to act than even other parts of Health and Human Services would. And I think they felt, I mean, the reading I get is that OIG felt under pressure to do more about Medicaid fraud. They wanted to make a national splash. I don't know what other factors may have been involved, but those two things come very clearly across. And I think they believed that the 21CT services represented an opportunity to basically hit a home run rather than to hit singles or something. And the nature of the procurement process and the approval process within HHSC let it happen, and so did the cooperative contract structure within DIR, which is intended to speed the procurement of technology, but this was a very, very complex procurement that was sort of portrayed as buying the software, or at least people were allowed to believe that. To be honest, I don't think a lot of the people we interviewed, and we conducted ultimately about 60 interviews in the space of a couple of months, really had any more knowledge of 21CT than we did. It was coming out of OIG, which has historically had a very difficult relationship with the commission, and you know, it was a perfect storm. As much as tried as I think that is, it was a perfect storm of factors that let it happen. And I think one of the people within the agency, very highly placed, told us the first $20 million could have happened to anybody. And to which we said, not a $20 million contract. There's no other agency in state government that would think, oh, well, you know, what's $20 million? And I don't say that they did that, but that's an extraordinarily large contract, except in the context of an agency that is over a third of the state budget.
So are you saying that this is a one-off, this is an anomaly? I mean, your report talks about several issues within the agency, not just this contract. It speaks of leadership issues. Can you talk about that? Should Cal Janik remain at the head of the agency?
Yeah, you just put that right in there at the end.
Yeah, I did.
Well, in a way it was a one-off, but I think it was also a symptom of weaknesses in the procurement process. You know, the Sunset Commission made a lot of HB 2292, which was the 2003 consolidation legislation, wanted to see all administrative services consolidated across the enterprise. That wasn't completed. It was a conscious decision of management that thought it had gone far enough. And the procurement process, you know, I try to be fair. I mean, the procurement process failed in this case, but you know, a major reason that they have problems, I think, with procurement is because it's such a large organization, these extraordinarily large contracts. So, you know, it is a management issue. It's a management issue that can be fixed. You know, our perspective was, look, I mean, and advice to the legislature, and the legislature can do what they want, but, you know, is don't throw out the competitive procurement process, tweak it so that this kind of procurement can happen. And within the agency, even while we were doing our work, the chief operating officer, John Scott, had brought in a team to go through procurement and fix it. These are management issues, and they can be fixed. I do think that there are larger management issues. I think to some degree they are related to how the office or the commission was itself functioning. I also think it really had a lot to do with how the commission was structured after the 2003 reorganization. It's a very flat organization. The executive commissioner has, I don't know, 20 people reporting directly to him. The span of control is enormous. The governor, Perry, intended, I believe, just reading press and whatnot, Chris Traylor, who's the executive deputy commissioner, the titles over there are baffling sometimes, but he intended for him to sort of be a chief deputy, and he wound up mainly managing the Medicaid program, which is extraordinarily important. But, you know, I think that the commissioner, whoever it is, needs help on a daily basis keeping up with those agencies and the sort of three critical functions within the commission.
Is there anything looking at the 21 CT contract where there was sort of a turning point, where there was a point of no return? Were you able to zero in on that, or were there several points of no return that were missed?
Well, you know, one of the things I wrote this at the end, and there is an idea and it particularly applies in, this is boring, I'm sorry, but there is an idea that applies in government, and it also applies in large-scale systems, which is kind of critical failure theory. And it says that no failure of a large-scale system, so the failure of the Challenger shuttle is a classic example of this. No failure of a system is the result of one thing. I mean, Health and Human Services problems didn't begin with 21 CT, and they won't end once that whole issue is resolved. They are a problem, they inevitably are a result of a series of bad decisions or questionable decisions or failures to decide that eventually cascade into what some people in that literature call a policy fiasco. And, you know, they usually can be stopped at some point. If the procurement director at HHSC had said, well, we're not going to do this, we need to do bids, or that we've run all of these, they were running tests on various Medicaid fraud detection software, that we need to make sure that all of those people have an opportunity to bid on it. Well, you know, maybe it all would have been fine, but you know, I think they zeroed in on this as an exceptional product, a game-changing product, and the procurement law allowed them to go to procure it directly.
So are you saying that Kyle Janik's a victim of the structure?
I'm saying the world is complicated. I think Dr. Janik, I mean, everything I know about him, I mean, the first thing, and I'm sorry he's not here, but
as am I.
Yeah, I bet. That, you know, I've known him for probably 20 years, and he was a good member of the legislature, and I believe he is trying to do the best job for Texas. I think the problem that he has, and I don't know if this would be a problem for anybody else, but it's a problem for him, and it's been a more or less problem for all the executive commissioners, is that this is an extraordinarily complex organization. It deals with very sensitive, highly, I mean, small p political issues. I mean, when you have the potential of children dying or mistreatment of the elderly or public health crises and Ebola epidemics and all these things across this broad span, you have got to be on your game all the time. I think the structure doesn't help the executive commissioner the way it is, and we made some recommendations along those lines. You know, I think he came to rely on a relatively small group of people, probably more heavily than he should have, and they didn't serve him well. So, you know, our job was not to say, was not to make a decision about the executive commissioner and who that should be. That is really up to Dr. Janik, the governor, and the legislature. And I assume that they have continued that discussion, and you know, they'll come to a resolution. But you just have to remember, it is a monstrous organization to manage for anybody. And, you know, that was kind of why we were so concerned about the idea of taking 17,000 person organization, which is already the largest, one of the largest in the state, and turning it into a 56,000 person organization. How you manage that, I'm not 100% sure.
So it sounds like a little bit like it really wouldn't have mattered who was in charge.
It always matters who's in charge.
Okay.
I mean, you have people who manage agencies for years and do very well, but you know, at times circumstances turn. I have said for years, going back to CPRIT and before, it's like every session, some agency is going to find itself in the box. And, you know, a lot of it has to do with timing. If you look back over the history of Health and Human Services, they've had other situations. If you look at the history of most agencies, they've had situations. And when they become a really big problem, you know, it gets in the press, it gets the legislature's attention, and of course the legislature wants to fix it. That's their responsibility. I'm not here to speak for Dr. Janik. I wish he could be here to speak for himself, because, you know, I think he does care about the agency. I think he does want it to work, but the fact of the matter is it's not working the way it's intended right now. That said, you know, services are delivered every day. They are working on all sorts of processes. I just think it could be improved, and we sort of looked at ourselves as doing a management consulting review and saying, look, here's where you are, and here's where we think you are, here's where we think the critical issues are, and here are improvements that can be made. Now, it's up to them in the legislature what they make of that.
What one change would help HHSC the most if they were limited to one thing? Is it changing the structure? Is it your report distinctively says you're against consolidation?
Well, I don't think consolidation would help. I mean, I think it might. I'm not saying it's the wrong solution, but I'm saying that it's right now the way the agency works, it doesn't make sense. I mean, if you're looking at it from a purely management standpoint, if your idea is that, well, we really need 1/3 of the government under one leader, then okay. But I mean, I think if most people stopped and turned that idea over in their mind, they would say, oh my gosh, that has worked so well at Homeland Security and IRS, and I mean, it's just mega agencies. I mean, I say that as a person who has run agencies, that is a big problem. If there's one thing I thought they should do, I thought it when I was there, is I think they need to get all of the deputy executive commissioners, and it may be they've done this, so I'm not there. You know, we finished the report, we disbanded, we went back to our real jobs. But I'd get them in a room and say, you know, none of us are leaving until we talk this issue out and figure out how we work together to repair where we are. You know, I'm sure you would get an argument from some people that, well, this is really not a problem. It really is a one-off. But the problem remains that they're in the box, and they need to work collectively to get it out. I also think the commissioner needs to have another level of management, to have day-to-day people paying attention to the commissions, you know, if they remain, paying attention to the administrative organization, which they have a COO doing that now, but that's relatively new. You know, paying attention to these various, you know, to Medicaid and to the, you know, eligibility determination. Have all, you know, have somebody paying attention to that and reporting to the commissioner, you know, in a formal structure. And right now the organization's very flat, and I think it's just tough.
What was the governor's reaction to your findings? Did you come first to, I'm assuming you came first to the governor with your findings?
Well, yeah, obviously. I mean, he's the boss. And, you know, I think they were, I think that I say the governor's office, I know I talked to the governor about this too, and they legitimately wanted an assessment. He wanted to have clear information and a reading from outside. And, you know, I was about as far outside as you could get. I thought if I could spend this session 100 miles from Austin, it would really be a good thing. And that lasted maybe 3 days, and there I was back, briefly. And, you know, I think he appreciated the input, and I think he will weigh it carefully. He's very thoughtful. He's given a lot of thought to this, and, you know, I mean, I can't characterize what he thinks, so I'm probably speculating, but he probably feels like we need to think this through because this is an important decision. And if that is in fact the case, then I fully agree. When you've got something this, you know, this is an I mean, imagine this as an enormously complicated machine, and there's a problem with the gear coming loose. Well, the idea is not to just sort of start pulling stuff out to see what happens. The idea is to be thoughtful and work through it. And, you know, I think Senator Nelson, Representative, senior moment, but you know, the legislature has been doing that as well. And you know, I had to, given the inclination to dive on a problem in like a rugby scrum or something, you got to give them credit for listening to what people are telling them about the nature of contracting problems, the nature of problems with consolidation, the nature of problems with the management within the agency.
So all of us who are hoping he'll make a decision quickly should look at this as thoughtfulness as far as Dr. Janik's appointment, which expired February 1st.
Well, I mean, I guess you could look at it any way you want, but you know, the problem. I mean, if I were looking at this, and I am not speaking for the governor, the governor's office, Texas A&M University system. I don't know anybody else I can think of, Chancellor, if you're watching this, or the Board of Regents of Texas A&M. Anybody, I'm speaking for myself. Is, man, if you came up with a, let's just say Dr. Janik elected to leave and they put someone else in, then that person is thrown into the legislative session with little or no preparation, incredibly complex issues. And, you know, I believe that, you know, the idea here is to give the commission the opportunity to address its issues in a logical way and see where they come out. It's a little distressing to me to hear today that Chris Traylor is going to retire at the end of this, I guess at the end of the session. I think that's an extraordinary loss. I think he was a pivotal figure, is a pivotal figure in that agency, and you know, that is only the most recent. You know, they lost Dr. Lakey. They've obviously had some problems along those lines, and that was one of the things we talked about. You know, we have this graying workforce problem.
You do at that agency with Chris Traylor and several people who are nearing retirement age. There's sort of a brain drain that's about to happen at HHSC, where people with large institutional knowledge about how the place works. Can you address at all how the agency is going to overcome that, as far as, you know, we've had this sort of 6 months of limbo, we have investigations. How do you recruit for that as an agency, and how do you keep people, good people, from coming in and good people from leaving right now?
Well, we asked the HR guy that.
He's new, I understand, right?
He is new, yes, and he seems extremely good. And you know, he said, you know, succession plan. I mean, he says the right things, the succession plan and whatnot, and you know, put it in perspective. I mean, it's always encouraged people, put this in perspective. I mean, this agency has had issues before. Other agencies have had issues before. They've worked their way through it. I know when we were at CPRIT, when Wayne Roberts and I came in, they had a problem with the person that was over the scientific part, and they'll never be able to find anyone that's willing to do it. And they found Dr. Margaret Kripke, and she was extraordinary. She really was. And now she's retiring, so they face that again. So, you know, these issues can be dealt with. But I think, you know, you've got to get through the session, see what the results of the legislature are, and then come up with a plan. And really, they understand, I believe, that there's a lot of planning that's going to go in to fixing the procurement problem, consolidating legal services, and completing the administrative consolidations that were intended under HB 2292, and then dealing with the bulk of the sunset recommendations, which were very good but are a huge demand. And you know, their plate is full before you get to consolidation. And, you know, I don't know where the legislature will come on that. I think at the least Child Protective Services and Public Health need to stay separate. But, you know, again, that's the legislature's call, and they know more about this than I do.
You talked a little bit about the governor's reaction to your findings. What were Dr. Janik's reactions to your findings when you came to brief him about? Was that a smooth conversation?
Yeah, it actually was.
Really?
He hadn't read it. No, I think we were asked to brief Dr. Jan. I think they released the study maybe on a Monday, or dates baffle me sometimes, but we briefed Dr. Janik on several days earlier than that. He hadn't seen it completely. I imagine once he read it carefully, you know, he had plenty of nits to pick, or maybe not so much, but you know, he was unfailingly cordial and helpful to us, and I think he wanted, you know, again, I'm doing a lot of expressing of other people's opinions here. I believe he sincerely wanted to get to the bottom of this issue, and obviously I have vested interest in that, but he wanted to get to the bottom of it, and he told his staff to be totally candid with us first day we were there, and you know, I felt like they were, and you know, we'll see, you know, how it goes from here.
Okay. Has there been any follow-up from the agency, or was this sort of a, gee, thanks, Billy Hamilton, for this report, see you later kind of thing?
Well, it was no is the answer. The short answer is we had one, I think we had one or two people ask us to clarify points about the you know, we proposed an organizational structure restructuring. You know, maybe we exceeded our brief. Maybe we should have spent all our time wringing our hands over 21CT, but I think that I look at that as a symptom, and it's like, you know, a person's got a rash on their hand and you're spending all your time trying to cure that rash while their fever's spiking or something like that. I thought the other issues, I thought the legislature was sort of all over contracting at that point, and, you know, I thought the benefit we had was putting things in context, helping to understand how this fits into a pattern of relationship between the commission and the OIG, how it fits into the overall process of consolidation under HB 2292, and then finally how all of it leads to what I think is really the essential issue of this entire thing, which is how are you going to manage health and human services in this state? And, you know, that 21CT is a 6 or 12 month problem for an agency. Consolidation is a generational issue. And what comes out of that, I think is, you know, the legislature, and I honestly, I believe Representative Parker, and I got that right, but Parker and Senator Nelson, I think the Speaker and Lieutenant Governor, I mean, they understand that this is a very important decision, and you know, I felt like when we briefed them, they understood the implications, went beyond, you know, software services under contracting. That's part of it. It has to be dealt with, but there are a lot of other issues.
Although we've talked about 21CT and that contract, there were several other things that were kind of sort of swirling around at the same time. We had the Terrell privatization contract going on. AT&T from the state auditor's office had gone way over what it initially had been estimated. So my question is, should Texans have any confidence that the agency can manage these large multi-million and sometimes billion-dollar contracts?
Well, if they knew John Scott.
The new CFO, right?
The new COO, yeah.
I'm sorry, COO.
Yeah, they would have a lot of confidence, in my opinion. So, but they don't, and so maybe they don't have any right to feel confident. I think that the agency is doing what they can, which is remaking the procurement structure. They brought in some people that were at the controller's office and working on contract and procurement. They are working to restructure that. That was really going on while we were, I mean, you know, it's like we would come up with issues and they'd say, oh, today we're having an ethics advisor added, and okay, got that one. And so, you know, we were a little worried about recommendations. So they're working on it, but, you know, this was true. I worked on CPRIT. I worked with Capital Metro when they were under Sunset Review, and this is not a whether it was legit, whether it was an accident, whether it was a one-off, this is not, I mean, when you have, I finally, you know, when I was writing the introduction, I was trying to recount things that had happened, and then I finally got to the end, we were just sick of writing, so we just started saying, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened. And there were like 20 things that happened within the space of about 30 days. And when that happens, and all of it was in the paper, and or in the Trib,
and online,
or in the Trib, definitively in the Trib. No, it was in the Statesman, the Chronicle, the Trib, and you know, when that happens, whatever the source, And the Public Integrity Unit will definitively tell us what the source was, I think, ultimately. When that happens, it takes a long, long time to dig out, no matter how good you are. You know, what I've said to people that face this kind of crisis is, you've just got to go in, make significant changes, and you've got to start hitting for average. You know, you don't want to try to hit one out of the park. You want to hit singles and doubles and move people. I hate to use baseball analogies, but you don't want to, you know, you want to show people that you understand there's a problem, that you understand it's a serious problem, that you've taken steps to fix it, that you understand you have a taint on your institution, and that, by George, you are committed to seeing that it doesn't happen again, although it inevitably will, and that you are, you know, that you get it, I guess.
Which goes to my next question. What are the characteristics for the right leader for the agency, whether it's a new person or not?
Really good hair.
What?
I try to say that one often. Well, I mean, if you look at the three leaders that have been there since HB 2292, you have Albert Hawkins, who was really one of the most knowledgeable people in the state, had worked at the budget board, had worked in Washington. You know, a lot of the procedures that inform their decision process right now are exactly the same ones the Bush White House used. You know, decision memos and this and that. You had Tom Cease, who had really come up through Health and Human Service organizations of one kind or another. And you have Dr. Janik, who was a senator and really, you know, a doctor, and therefore unfamiliar with, or at least having less familiarity than the first two with, working in and managing large organizations. So, you know, in making our recommendations, we believed it's the governor's call as to what happens to Dr. Janik or whoever, you know, comes at some point to after him. I mean, that, you know, however long he decides to stay around and enjoy this opportunity, there'll be another commissioner. There's been a bunch. There's going to be more. I think that any commissioner can be successful if they have management skills and are willing to listen to the people of the agency. I'm not saying be captured by the bureaucracy, but to listen to what they're saying, to work closely with the commissioners, the other commissioners, assuming there still are other commissioners at the end of the session, and to divide out responsibility so that this almost sounds like NSA theory here, but so that somebody's watching all the time. You know, my theory of managing organizations is assume something terrible is going to happen at any moment, and I just want to find what it is before it happens. You know, it's that whole cascade of problems sort of thing. So it's a friend of mine and I wrote a book about this, and we called it mindful management, in the sense that you were mindful of the possibility of failure at all times and mitigating against that. So I think they've got to be a very, very good manager, and I think any of them could do it, but you know, the less knowledge and understanding of the government they come into at the beginning, the more they need to help, you know, bring in and learn to rely on their colleagues to help them cover the basis.
Okay. I'd like to open it up for any questions from anybody in the audience.
Anybody awake?
Oh, now?
The concern I have.
You're the infamous Dr. Greenfield, is that not correct?
Is the training of state employees. One of the aftermaths of this, because of the paying of the MBAs and so on and so forth, is it appears that the legislature and the agencies that reacted is, we ain't gonna train state employees anymore, because we don't wanna see our name above the fold on the two existing newspapers in the state. How does one address that? I mean, if you're not training your employees, your agency is dead.
Are you referring to like Casey Haney's MBA?
Yes.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you know, it's I don't think that's the message at all. I mean, I don't. You know, you're so smart. I'm leery of this, but you know, that was like a $90,000 course that was prepaid. You were at the controller's office, and you know as well as I do that if you took I once long ago took a course that the state agreed to pay for because I was working in revenue estimating, and it was an economics course, and I had to buy the books, I had to pay the tuition, and I had to make an A or a B, or Mr. Bullock was not paying me back. And you know, and that course was probably, I don't know, this was like so long ago, it was probably 50 cents or something, but and that was, you know, a couple of $100, not $90,000.
But my thing is the reaction of the agency, the highway department, you know, the press going through, how much do we spend on training? It just seems to me the natural reaction of agencies are going to, we don't want to see our name in the Tribune, we're going to reduce expenditures to train employees.
Well, I mean, I think the natural reaction of agencies, and sometimes, occasionally, other legislatures, I'm not going to say this one, the natural reaction to any problem is overreaction. It's like, okay, if you know, this cooperative, I mean, that was what we were most afraid of. Our recommendations, I felt like, were minor, you know, possibly compared to what were being talked about at the time, but we seriously thought you could fix this problem with a few tweaks. You know, again, it's a matter of disrupting a cascade of bad decisions at the right place. The same is true with training. I think we desperately need to train, and you know, I trust Controller Hager is not skimping on training tax auditors, because that would be a bad idea, and I think he knows that. And I don't think agencies can get away without training people. The problem, the issue is not abusing that. And, you know, there's an unspoken problem here that, you know, I know people know, is that, or at least that we pick this vibe up over and over, is that within the Health and Human Service enterprise, HHSC is sometimes viewed as the, you know, the golden child. And the other commissions are sort of afterthought. I mean, they're not afterthoughts as a matter of policy, but, you know, they don't have, they're not the rock stars of the show. HHSC is, and that may or may not be the case, but, you know, letting people at the very upper end have these, you know, get their MBAs prepaid and stuff like that certainly doesn't help that morale issue.
Anybody else? Well,
You want me to sing?
Oh, please. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Hamilton. I really appreciate it. Thank you.